Personal and household debt at all-time highs, far fewer loan transactions, low interest. All bad signs for banks. Not to mention their exposure to airlines, hotels, tourists, and other industries. I'll be surprised if any can pass the stress test. They can't play fast and lose with bank members' cash. Banking shares still down about 30% on the year to date, even as a handful of technology companies have helped major U.S. stock indexes trade near record territory. Bank stocks are just like airline stocks. They won't make a profit, if anyone cares, for a couple of years, as loan defaults increase, and Powell put the nail in the coffin that the rate will stay zero for a few years. Banks own bonds as their principal assets, which are declining value as interest rates fell drastically, approaching zero. Banks' primary source of income is interest received. Thus the value of the assets declines as their income should be rising to offset the losses. The Fed saying interest rates won't go up in 2 years was not a smart move. Zero interest is bad for banks, and a slight increase in the future will not be enough. Bad loans are accelerating. Brokerage fees are super low. I'm not feeling great about banks, at least not current prices. Rising unemployment left many consumers unable to pay back their debts or to take on new borrowing, forcing banks to set aside more to cover increasing loans and crimping their net interest income. At the same time, the lockdowns left once bustling downtown restaurants, bars, and hotels deserted, which hurt a cornerstone of banks' growth in recent years: service charges and credit card fees. Wells Fargo, the largest employer among U.S. banks, is already preparing to cut thousands of jobs this year. The rising debt write-offs from this recession will likely hit banks hard next year. Banks won't remain as profitable as they are at present. Banks' exposure to derivatives may be the biggest risk. And that risk is difficult to quantify. Since everything is linked these days globally, it's not hard to see how contagion could spread very fast to all parts of the world. Decade after crisis, a $600 trillion market remains murky to regulators. Buckle up. The house of cards is about to crash. 2008 financial crisis all over again. Park your cash to buy precious metals. This shitshow is just getting started. Wait till food banks can no longer afford hyperinflated food. Welcome back to the Atlantis Report. You are here for your daily dose of the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Please take a second to click the like button. Many of you have asked me where they can buy silver and gold bullion. You will find in the description box the links where you can buy American Silver Eagle, silver bars, or rounds. I highly recommend that you start stacking some silver bullion for the future. The whole banking system is one big octopus with its slimy tentacles and everything. The existence of the central bank and fractional reserve banking permits commercial banks to generate credit, which is not backed up by real funding. It is credit created out of thin air. All banks are today insolvent, hence the repo markets are now being run by central bank money. Welcome to the Atlantis Report. A bank has current creditors. On the whole, these are people like you and me who have our salaries or savings paid or deposited into our accounts on our behalf. We do not actually own our money that is stored in the bank. The bank does. This may come as a surprise to you. However, this is a very well-established point of law. Since 1811, this has been the case. So you and I are the current creditors to the bank, i.e., we are owed money by the bank. In fact, your bank statement is just an IOU from the bank, acknowledging that it owes you however much it says on the statement on demand. Depositors are unsecured creditors on the bank's balance sheet. Riddle me this: when you take out a credit card, the bank is the unsecured creditor, and the debt is unsecured. They charge us quite a bit of interest, from 19% to 22%. Yet when we loan the bank our cash via deposits, what is the interest that we unsecured creditors receive? 1% at best. The assets of the bank are those people to whom the bank has lent its your money to, i.e., all the borrowers of loans. As has been so clearly displayed during the 2008 crisis, they have lent their money out, formerly your money, over 33 times on average to borrowers. So when more than one of 33 of us clients of a bank wish to withdraw our money that is on demand, the bank cannot pay it back as it does not have it. As for banks, deposits are loans from the depositor to the bank. They represent the liabilities of the bank. It is true that the assets of the bank, such as loans, securities, and reserves, are assets of the bank. Banks are solvent only if the assets are more significant than the liabilities. The idea that a bank, or any other firm, is insolvent only because something might happen is absurd. There are many things that might happen to a bank, making it unable to pay off its liabilities. For a bank, if none of its creditors could pay off its existing loans, it would fail. It could happen. It is happening all the time. The US government and its monopoly money printer, also known as the Federal Reserve, have painted themselves into a bankruptcy corner. Not only are more and more foreign nations rejecting America's aggressive and militant foreign policy, but they are also ridding themselves of the Fed's dollar. Foreign central banks are increasingly gravitating to sound money like gold. The Fed is on its last legs. And it appears that banks all across the country are about to go dark, and Bank of America is starting to give us the first hints of the next Lehman-style collapse. Unless the government is willing to prosecute bankers for fraud, I don't see why anyone would use profits to build up capital reserves when they could just pay themselves special dividends or stock buyback and let the companies run themselves into the ground. Did the principals at Lehman or Bear care that they ran those companies into the ground? We and our children and grandchildren will pay for the de facto bailouts, e.g., QE, for dozens of years or more. However, the shock to the financial system of the bank's collapse could have been averted in other ways. The banksters stampeded the US Congress into bailing them out without conditions or banksters' loss of bank ownership like you scare cattle. Usually, the management and shareholders of bankrupt corporations lose everything, and if the entities continue, the bank's new shareholders are their former creditors. That is the bankruptcy process. The US Congress could just have passed emergency laws and taken over the banks, guaranteed their debts to avoid collateral damage to others, and left the banksters holding nothing, without any more control of the banks. Due to the Constitution, the US would just have had to pay the banksters whatever their banks were worth at the moment when they collapsed, or had to be taken over and needed US government aid, even if most concealed that fact. Whatever the banks were worth when they were insolvent and taken over by the government could have been paid over to the banksters, zero or close to it. The banksters used, and will soon use again, fear of financial collapse to demand enormous bailouts, and get huge amounts of Fed ultra-low interest rate loans, which let them keep control of our financial system despite their massive frauds against pensioners and others in selling worthless re-mortgage-backed securities, which they knew would fail. Unfortunately, the banksters' demands for bailouts will soon resume. It is just a matter of time given the derivatives and other risks that they are taking. They cannot be called casinos because professionally run casinos do not really run the risks that major banks are running now. The only positive is that they will soon need such huge bailouts that the IMF or EU will have to participate. Let us hope that they at least are a little less corrupt and controlled by the banksters, so they impose conditions on the banksters' bailouts, such as new bank owners and new officers. Funny how banks point to Bitcoin and other crypto assets as being used by criminals and such while they knowingly and willingly launder hundreds of billions of dollars of dirty money. Amazing how billions of dollars earned through a variety of criminal enterprises are laundered all over the world. The lawyers and bankers are as criminal that the criminals they work for. If these monies were confiscated and redirected for humanitarian efforts, how much better the world would be. Nobody ever gets jail time. Billions were stolen, leading up to the 2008 crisis, and nobody held accountable. Now, if you are poor and steal a car, jail time is definitely in the cards. Poor people have to learn the right place to be a crook. Shows you how important a good education is. There are certain institutions that are protected in this country regardless of the crime. Religion and banking are two areas. This could be stopped immediately with jail time for executives, but of course, these executives are the real owners of this country that own you and me. George Carlin was so right. A Roman historian once wrote that at some point, the secret of empire was out, that emperors could be made not in Rome, but in the provinces if they had enough legions backing the claim. Well, the secret of economics is out. Money does not have to be made through trade, industry, and extraction. It can be summoned up via computer at will. We may not like it or agree with it, but the bankers know it, and they are basing their actions accordingly. The real sad part is that at this time in history, a thorough investigation of large bank activity and actual reserves versus stated reserves would likely result in a banking sector crash. Large bank balance sheets are so over-leveraged by CRE and private investment loans that the moral hazard that was feared in 2008-2009 took hold in 2012. Banks are not going to do things equitably, nor honestly, up and until some executives do a perp walk and are sentenced to real time in prison. Until then, you and I will be the bank backstop in the foreseeable future. Why change your habits when there is no penalty for bad behavior and tremendous reward for the same bad behavior? Systemic corruption has been the order of the decades. How can anyone in their right mind even consider investing in any market? A plague on both their houses, for they have made worms meat of our economy. My guess is the capitalist economic musical chairs is game over, the music has stopped, and the last man has taken the last seat. My favorite definition of our economy is, the person who dies with the most money wins. The little issue of derivatives exposure is now usually ignored in discussions of bank finances. They amount to reportedly over $100 trillion, and banks have at most capital of 1.5 to 5% of the value of their investments. The bank's exposure is massive. I am surprised that the bank's stocks are as high as they are. It is because they make profits from risky transactions effectively guaranteed by the US government if they lose through Fed and TARP-type bailouts, and by dividends and stock buybacks if their bets come back as winners. We should give the privilege of fractional reserve banking, effective government guarantee of against losses, access to ultra-low interest rate loans from the Fed, even when the entities are insolvent, Fed protection, to America's biggest employers and companies which are important to our nation, not to the most crooked and incompetently run by banksters. Let Intel or GM create banks and get the Fed loans if they agree to increase numbers of US employees. Government prosecuting bankers for fraud? No way. The banksters own our so-called regulators and enforcers. The wealthy control the US absolutely, and that control has been on the upswing over this past decade. It's the goddamned Federal Reserve Act that got us here. And the decoupling of gold from the dollar in 1971. The only game in town, for a long time, has been the stock market. And when that is no longer viable, nothing lasts forever, nothing automatically gets bailed out. In a universe perpetually in flux, nothing is for certain and never will be. We have simply been spoiled by easy debt. Subscribe. And please take some time to subscribe to my backup channels, I do upload videos there too. You'll find the links in the description box. You will also find a PayPal link if you want to make a donation. Thank you wholeheartedly to all those of you who have donated. Stay safe and healthy, friends.